Welcome back to Advus After Hours, a podcast focused on the intersection of innovation, finance, and community. Today, we have the pleasure of sitting down with Jeff Harvey, CEO of Community Legal Services. Community Legal Services provides no-cost legal services to the most vulnerable in Central Florida, protecting their families, livelihoods, and households. Let's join our conversation with Jeff.
I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
You know, our first time meeting was only a month ago at the Victory Cup breakfast and got to briefly hear your story for, what was it, 2 minutes, I think?
Yeah, two and a half.
Yeah. And it was great to hear, and you did a phenomenal job. But I think it left us wanting to understand more about it, and hence you kind of joining us here. So I appreciate your time.
I appreciate you having me.
How we typically start off is just a little bit of background about yourself. I know you are a native to Central Florida. Is that correct?
I am. I was born and raised here. Went to school right down the street on Park Avenue, and then Bishop Moore, and then obviously left for college and other things, and then came back.
You went to BC?
I did.
Did you do ROTC at Boston College?
I did ROTC at Boston College. Really good way to pay for school.
Yeah.
And then effectively the day before graduation, I commissioned to the Army and then graduated. And then within, I think, a month, I was out at my basic course.
Backing up a little bit, though, because I jumped ahead. What led you to Boston College? That's a big jump from someone from Florida.
Good question. Growing up, I was very much interested in leadership, and I probably wouldn't have been able to tell you that at the time. And so I'm one of those people that when I get interested in something, I immediately try to go figure out, like, what's the pinnacle piece of this, right? And of course, as a kid in grade school, like, who's the pinnacle leader in the world, right? It's the president of the United States. So that's what I wanted to do. That's where I wanted to be. And you study history and you go through all the stuff, and I think two pieces of it, right? One, if you look at least, let's say, the first half of the presidents, right? The majority of them, if you look at, or plurality, or the most that went to one school, all went to Harvard. So that's where I was going to go to college, because that was considered, quote, the best of the best. When I got to my senior year, and I looked at it and really kind of looked for what's a good fit, BC was a great fit. Harvard really wasn't what I was looking for. So I went over and just kind of shifted focus, and that became my primary goal. And then, of course, the Army was a way to pay for it. And so,
was that the initial reason behind joining the military, or was there
It was. I originally went in and said, well, everybody should serve, right? If you look, great leaders, all great leaders supposedly at the time I had done service in the military, so I should go do that. They're going to pay for school. What harm could there be? And I spent my first year going, what did I get myself into? Because when you do your first year at ROTC, you're like, you're a brand new cadet, and the students are the ones that are in charge and they run everything, but you're effectively like a brand new private. Like, they tell you where to go, what to do, when to do it. And doing that in a regular school, not like a West Point or whatever.
Right.
All your other friends are out partying and they're sleeping in late, and you got to get up in the morning at 5:30 for PT, and you've got to go to these training events. And so it was a little complicated. By the time I got to my sophomore year, I started getting positions of responsibility. And that's kind of where I started to realize that leadership was what I was interested in. So anything that we'll talk about today, at its core, leadership is my number one passion.
What made you decide the Army over other branches?
A lot of it just was money. I had a full ride to George Washington on the Navy. I had an appointment to West Point. I really wanted to go to BC, so I said, great, if the Army's going to pay for BC, then that's where I'm going to go, and I'll jump in with the Army. I'm glad that I did, because I think the style of leadership, now that I've gone 25 years later, the style of leadership that they have in the Army versus some of the other armed forces are, it's really more what I'm interested in.
You said, you like to be in the upper echelon of kind of the group you're in. Is that what led you to going to Ranger School and join the Army Rangers?
Kind of. Ranger School is kind of marketed as the premier leadership school in the world. And part of that is because their methodology is to literally break you down without any sort of basic comforts, and then help you figure out, okay, what do you do? What do you do when you haven't slept more than 2 hours a night for the last 5 days, and you are starving to death because you're not eating, and you've got to do an impossible task? I mean, I remember one of my missions that I got assigned to do is that they give you different positions of responsibility, and then they rotate you. And so sometimes you're the follower and sometimes you're the leader. And the one that I had, it was in mountain phase in Georgia. And I had to set up this kind of perimeter on the side of a mountain in the dark. And everybody was miserable. And when I got done and it got light out and you got to see what this perimeter looked like, it was atrocious. It was terrible. And everybody in my group was like, man, that sucks. You failed. You know what I mean? Later on that day, that the guy that evaluates you kind of sits you down and says, okay, here's what you got. And you don't know if you passed or not most of the time. In this particular one, he said, hey, listen, I should probably fail you because that was the ugliest one I've ever seen. But what I will tell you and why I'm not going to fail you is because you consistently throughout the entire night you started trying to give direction. People weren't understanding what to do. Nobody could see. You started picking people up and placing them where you wanted it. And he's like, you continued to go and did not stop. And so because of that, well, I'm going to go ahead and pass you. It was great. But do you think about that in the state that I was in,
right?
What the task I had to do and then the feedback I got, you internalize that lesson. Like, okay, as long as I keep trying to move forward and I don't quit, then I'm not a failure.
Was the intention going in to kind of make a career out of it, or was there always kind of some end goal beyond the military? What was your goal going in?
I didn't really have a goal when I first started. I enjoyed what I was doing. So let's see where this goes. I started in the Army in June of 2001. Fast forward, what is it, 4 or 5 months later, I shot artillery for the first time, right? So if you've ever shot an artillery or seen it, it's a pretty big cannon. And when you pull the lanyard in it and it fires, like it shakes you. Like there's even a thing that we kind of joke around with newbies where you set them on the trails and level it all the way up so that when it fires, it kind of bounces you around, right? It's kind of a big deal. And right after I had shot my first round, the guy that was there training us said, hey, I just got a phone call from my wife and a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And like stuff changed. So at that point, within a week, they were telling me, hey, well, you're going to go to Fort Campbell. You're going to be with the 101st. Get ready to go to Afghanistan. And I don't know if I believed him or not, but sure enough, like 4 months later, I was at my first unit. And a week after I showed up, I was in Afghanistan. Before I got back from Afghanistan, we already knew that we were going to Iraq. When everybody else got the word from the president, I think was it March 12th or something like that. I'd already spent the last 30 days on a boat going from Jacksonville over to Kuwait. I got to a point where I was kind of tired of going overseas.
Right.
I had met my wife and said, you know what, I can't keep going back and forth. I was looking for something different. So that's when I decided to get off active duty and go to law school. But at that point, I'd already been in 10 years. So I'm halfway to retirement. So I figured, well, let's see what the National Guard can offer. So that's when I transitioned to the Guard.
One of the questions we normally ask is essentially, what's your why? The Simon Sinek thing. Why do you do what you do at this point in your career?
From the legal work perspective, I do what I do because I have a special skill that not everybody has. And I think that it's really, I'm called to improve the community with it. And so it gives me a way to do that. I've had high paying clients before and they're super grateful that their bill is low or that, you dealt with an issue and all the hassle they didn't want to deal with. But then you get a client that's not paying anything at all because they can't. And they're like indebted to you. Like they're grateful. You changed their lives. And I mean, it's such a great feeling. From the organizational standpoint, why do I do what I do? You spend the majority of your time every week at work. You should love where you work, especially when you're a group of people that does so much to impact the community and people's lives. They should love what they do. And so from a leadership perspective, that's why I do what I do. I want to create an environment where people are there to take care of the community and they love that they're doing it. And there's nothing from the organization that they can complain about that gets in that way of that.
How did we get to the point now where you're CEO of CLS?
Probably my first month at Stetson, I was sitting in a program that was focused on, for first year students, they focused on professionalism. And I remember kind of wrestling with this idea that I just left a culture organization that prided itself on values. You have the Army values that are drilled into your head. I was entering a new profession. And how was I going to still be myself, knowing that at least what appears to the public in the professional law is nowhere near the type of level of values and kind of professionalism that you would see in something like the military. And the proof of that is if you go look at those reports that talk about, they rank the public's opinion of different professions, right? Military is usually somewhere in the top third, depending on what's going on. And lawyers are usually somewhere in the bottom third.
Right. I think we're down there too.
I think we're also the bottom third.
And so that particular session was focused around a gentleman by the name of Fred Carl. And Fred Carl was a 1949 Stetson grad, law school. He was a Battle of the Bulge Silver Star winner and Purple Heart winner in World War II. And he was the last elected member of the Florida Supreme Court, spent, a couple of terms in the state legislature.
Wow.
and had moved back to Tampa. And if you ever look at articles about him, they basically say, you have trouble in government, go get Fred Carl, because he was the guy that would bring people together and really kind of work things out. And he was only in the Supreme Court for a year, in part because he couldn't afford to stay there. I mean, it wasn't because he didn't want to do the work. It was just financially it didn't work for him. So he came back to Tampa and did a lot of good in that area for the community. He was involved in, I think, a lot of the negotiations with the hockey team and some of the other sports teams there. His name is now in the Hillsborough County building. It's named after him. I befriended him and I wrote him a letter. He became a mentor of mine.
Love it.
We met regularly throughout law school. Sadly, he passed away. I'll tell you the story. So if you ever take the Florida bar exam, it's at the Tampa Convention Center, which is connected with a little overpass. And it's right next to Davis Island. And that's where Mr. Carl lived, to a hotel. And I was walking across the overpass, getting ready to go take my second portion of my second day. And a bunch of ambulances were rushing through. I found out later that day that it was Fred.
Wow.
And so he died the following Monday, right after I took the bar.
Wow.
Yeah. I knew based on my skills and my experience that where I was going to be the most happy in law was managing.
Right.
And so I kind of wanted to manage a law firm, for lack of a better word. But the problem with the profession is, for the most part, it doesn't matter if you're 50 or you're 25. If you right out of law school, you're a brand new lawyer, and nobody wants anything to do with you from a management perspective. They could care less what your skills are. And so there was no way that I was going to do that unless I either started my own firm or I did it for 25 years and built up a book of business and somehow muscled my way to the top partner. So I practiced private practice for 3-4 years, tried to kind of get some experience under my belt. And then the legal aid that I'm at approached me and said, hey, we need a director of operations. We need somebody to manage our HR side. We need somebody to look at our hotline and kind of figure out how to streamline that and make it more effective. And so I took the job. 5 years later, I had kind of built a rapport with the organization and applied for the CEO job when it became available. And thankfully they selected me. So now I get to lead a law firm, right?
That's incredible.
Not only a law firm, but I'd say, I think this year we're 10, but last year we were 8th largest law firm in Central Florida.
Really?
So we were right behind Gray Robinson in terms of size.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I think you were saying earlier before we came on that you're the biggest firm you've never heard of, kind of thing.
I'd say the biggest resource, right?
Yeah, biggest resource.
With a firm that size, we help a lot of people. On average, it's about 10,000 people a year. And with only about 60, this year, I think we're going to grow to about 75 lawyers. Can
you describe what Community Legal Services does and who you help and how that really works on like a practical example of like a family or individual you'd work with?
So we're a nonprofit law firm that does civil legal work for people that are vulnerable in Central Florida, poor, seniors, survivors of domestic violence, veterans, people that are really impacted, I would say, disproportionately by the law. That they're in a situation where they're trying to decide between, in many cases, two of life's basic needs, or they're being cut off from a life basic need, right? Food, shelter, safety, those types of things. And so we provide assistance at no charge. Our territory, if you will, is 12 counties. Our primary funding comes from the Legal Services Corporation, which is a nonprofit created by Congress. And they give out a congressional appropriation to, I think it's 147 programs like mine. So in every county in the United States and in the territories, there's a legal aid that covers that. Ours is 12 counties in Florida. We go from Flagler on the east side, Flagler down to Brevard, and then all along the I-4 corridor until you get to Polk. We don't have Polk County, and then we're on the north side of the I-4 corridor. So Citrus, Hernando, Sumter. So it's a pretty big area. Off the top of my head, I want to say it's something in the neighborhood of 7 or 8 million people that live in that area.
Yeah. And
I think Florida's about 21 or 22. So it's a pretty good chunk of the state. And eligible, we probably would have between 1.5 and 2, probably closer to 1.5 people that are eligible. So our eligibility is primarily based on income, and you have to be at or below the 200% of the poverty level. So what that means in real numbers, it's an income of $36,000 for a family of 4, I think.
Okay.
Pretty low.
Yeah.
I need to check that. It actually might be 60.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Okay. We can check it.
It's like 17 for an individual.
Okay.
It is pretty low though. And then we have exceptions to that. So In most counties, if you're over the age of 60, we can help you regardless of income, based on their vulnerable status. If you are a veteran, in many cases, not all cases, we can help you regardless of income. If you are a survivor of domestic violence, you're dealing with a domestic violence situation, we can help you regardless of income. Every once in a while, we'll get a special grant, and the special grant is focused on a particular topic. And so like we got one from Volunteer Florida to help people that have disaster issues from Hurricane Ian.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, technically we can help anybody that's a Hurricane Ian survivor. Now we have limited that to the kind of focus on the general types of clients we serve, but it gives us a little bit more leeway that, if you make $2 too much, we can still assist you.
No, it's super helpful.
Really the goal is to help people protect their livelihood and their health and their families.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll try to give you a good example.
Well, just even what you just said too, deciding between two of the basic needs at the same time. I mean, that just shows the kind of a situation a lot of the people are in when they come to you, and just how big a service it is. 'Cause I think most of the time when people hear nonprofits, you think, giving away food or shelter, something other basic needs. But legal's right in the middle of all of that.
It is. You actually hit on one of my big selling points lately, which is I think every nonprofit should consider incorporating legal services as a part of their delivery model, right? So if you're going to give out food, what are you doing to try to make sure that they have sustainable food, right? You can raise money and hand out meals all day long, but if you don't help the individual have a guaranteed source of resources, then I don't think you're doing enough. And so we do those types of things in pretty much any civil area. So access to public benefits, food stamps, Social Security, disability, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits on the income side. You look at it on the housing side, eviction defense, foreclosure defense. I personally do a lot of property and title work. So somebody that actually owns a house or should own a house, but has their property being threatened, that's cost prohibitive for people in the income bracket we serve. And I'll give you an example. I had a client, she was 7 years old, lived out near Sanford. She had been in a home that effectively was abandoned for 13 years. And for those 13 years, she'd been paying the taxes. She'd been fixing it up. Well, under the law, that means that she should have title to the home. After 7 years of completely abandoned with no interaction by the property owner, somebody else who's taking care of it like it's their own, it becomes theirs. She came to us. She actually came to us originally because she had found a nonprofit that was going to build her a ramp and convert her bathroom to be handicap accessible because she had knee problems. She couldn't get a permit to do that because she wasn't the owner of the home. We convinced the city to give her the permit, and then also took on the case to get her title. And the hardest part about that is the house had been abandoned. So it took me a year and a half just to find somebody to serve, because no court wants to give away a free house without at least a counter argument. Even if it's not going to work, you got to have somebody on the other side. Just as an example, that property was worth, on the property appraiser's website, about $25,000. If you're familiar with homestead exemptions, she would be paying no income or no property tax. But she'd been paying property tax for 13 years because she didn't qualify. The case, when we all got done, would have cost her in the neighborhood of $60,000 or $70,000. Who's going to spend $70,000 to save a $25,000 home, right? But then on the flip side, how can you put a price on a place to live?
Having a home, yeah.
So that's just one example of the work that we do. I think the one I talked about during Victory Cup was a senior. I seem to have a lot of cases with seniors, but and we help a lot of seniors. But she had fallen on some hard times from a medical perspective, and her daughter convinced her to let her and her family move in, and that she was going to take care of everything, but she had to sign the house over to her. And the odd thing is that they actually put this in writing. Mom, I will take care of you until you die. You sign the house to me. We're going to get a mortgage. I'm going to take on a bunch of debt, but you'll take it on too. And then 3 months later, they had kicked her out. In that instance, she lived on like $1,200 a month Social Security. What are you going to find a place to live for $1,200 a month, let alone eat, right? So now she's trying to figure out, how do I eat and how do I live on this limited income? She had resources. They were all tied up in this house. It had probably 50% equity, equity that she had built over 20 years. We were able to get in and basically challenge that, got all her equity out of the house. And now she's got a place to live, and she's got obviously that nest egg that she'll live on for the next, I think she was close to 80. So for the next 10, 20 years before she dies, that and $1,200 a month is it.
These are incredible stories. I'm sure there's thousands. How do these people end up finding y'all? How do they reach out? How do people get in touch to get these services that are so needed?
So it's one of the things I'm most proud of over the last 4 years is we've really invested heavily in marketing.
Yeah.
You know, the traditional nonprofit approach is outreach. You go find a community center, you go find a church, someplace that you can reach the clients. And we still do a lot of that too. But if you think about the number of people in our service area, so we're in 12 counties, it's about 1.5 million that we can serve. And the number of people that you meet at an outreach, let's say at best 100, and it's 3 or 4 hours worth of work with 2 individuals that had to drive there, and you get paid mileage and you got collateral, and it just wasn't the most effective means of reaching everybody. And so we've invested very heavily in marketing. We have a very talented marketing team, and we've started doing things like TV commercials. We've started doing things like a lot of YouTube and those types of things. And we even had, I think during the pandemic, we had a video that we were supposed to get 25,000 views for. I think we paid that. We would guarantee 25,000 views, for a month.
Right.
We had over 1 million views in 1 month.
Really?
Because it was something that people were searching for. Jeez. And they just found it.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of my peers would probably say like, oh, why don't you just spend that money on more lawyers? But, when you look at the problem, right? No attorney will tell a client, I wish you would come to me. Don't worry about this. Come to me in 6 months when the case is almost over. Like the earlier you get there,
right,
the easier it is to fix, the less amount of resources it takes to fix it. And so to me, getting clients early and helping either coach them through a problem before it becomes litigation or get on the litigation early, so much more likely to be successful. And so that, then I've got the lawyers that I have, right? So I'm doing more with less.
Speaking of the attorneys, where do you find all the attorneys? Is it a lot of pro bono stuff or?
So I said, 60, we're almost at 75 now, lawyers. Those are all paid staff, full-time staff.
I know there's also a peer opportunity, peer learning.
Yeah. So the hard thing with pro bono attorneys is, when you first get them started is they're very hesitant, like how much are they committing to? Mm-hmm. So we've kind of built this whole range of things that, you can do an hour or you can do a case or you can do more than that. But one of the things that we offer is Peer Academy. And what that is if you're interested in a different area of law, you can sign up for this class that's taught by other lawyers. And so let's say there's 2 or 3 instructors, and then you got probably 12 or so in the class. It's competitive to get in.
Okay.
And you spend the next 6 months learning about that area of the law. I think they meet once a month for 2 or 3 hours over Zoom. And then after they learn everything there is to learn about that area of the law, the requirement is that they do 2 cases. But they're doing those 2 cases with these dedicated people that can coach them through it. And so what they build through that is not just a new practice area,
right,
but they've got 2 experts, and then they've also got 11 other classmates that they can call and say, hey, I'm working on this case. Have you ever seen this type of issue? And so it really provides them with a network. It provides them with that new area. It takes away the kind of pressure of I'm taking a case. And I think it takes them from some place where they wouldn't know what they were doing in a particular topic to being very comfortable providing that assistance.
If you're looking to grow and give back, it sounds like a no-brainer.
Yeah. And frankly, we've come up with the ideas on the different topics. We've done bankruptcy, we've done estate planning, we might have probate, we've done family law. Those are all based on areas of need. Mm-hmm. But you get 12 lawyers together that are interested in a particular topic, we'll find an expert and we'll put one on for you. I mean, it's that easy. You still have to take 2 cases, but I think it's worth the investment.
So talking about awareness and kind of marketing, tell us a little bit about your experience at Victory Cup and the storytelling and the training there, because I mean, you've been in some obviously high pressure situations between, being a lawyer as well as being in the military and being overseas, but getting in a room like that with a couple thousand of the bigger names in Orlando, and then the what's it called? Steinbrenner Hall?
Steinmetz?
Yeah.
High pressure. Tell us about that whole process.
It's funny. I've gotten up in rooms that size and spoken to people. It's not a big deal. But that particular one, I will tell you that the nerves that were running through me, and I can say this, were very similar to that of getting shot at, or a couple of times that I've had a helicopter almost go down.
Unbelievable.
It was, and I think part of it was because it's such a short window of time to tell your message. I'm much more of an off script type of guy, so like I'll get the point across and I'll get the feeling across, but you put a 2.5 minute timer on me, and all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a minute, but I forgot something, and it doesn't make sense.
And you know the audience cares too, and you want to get that across. I'm
Right.
sure, like
Right.
And
then
it's also not just for you, right? It's
Right.
it's
Exactly.
for all of your, you know, your
There was a lot of
attorneys and
lives at
constituents,
stake.
and yeah, exactly.
right,
I also got the, I guess, lucky or unlucky privilege of going first.
Right.
that's right.
So
Yeah.
they were in a new hall. I knew they
Yeah.
were having some challenges with the sound and the
Okay.
timing and everything else. And then all of a sudden here, I got to go first and kind of break the ice. And so I think you put all that together and it was like, ooh. So I started out with the oath. And if you actually look at the oath of office for the military, right? I mean, I could recite that to you. You know, I state your name, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, right? And you go through the whole, when you take the oath of becoming a lawyer, it's the same thing, right? It's,
Right.
I'm going to support the Constitution of the United States. The speech that I gave at Victory Cup started out with me taking that oath in front of everybody. And then talking about the first time that I took that oath was, you know, as we talked about earlier, right? When I was commissioned. 4 months later, I was, you know, September 11th. And then 4 months after that, I was in Afghanistan. And going through that Afghanistan and 3 rotations to Iraq, and then kind of saying, okay, time for a change, and then went and became a lawyer. And I took that oath again as a lawyer. And I remember when I took that oath as a lawyer, it was April 18th, 2013. It wasn't lost on me at that point that like, this is kind of the same thing. It's just from a different angle, right? And so in this speech, I talked a little bit about the military service, but then really went on to talk about the legal service. And I shared a story about the one I shared with you all earlier, which was about the lady that was kicked out of her home by her own daughter.
Yeah.
And then really talked about, you know, the duty that I think lawyers have to serve the community. And so, and really then bigger than that, the importance of the community knowing that there's lawyers that serve that duty and also being able to provide that to people that otherwise couldn't.
How many times did you rehearse that, you think? Because it was 2 minutes in and out.
Concise, clean, got to the point, impactful.
I want to say I ran through it at least 50 to 100 times in little pieces or there. And that was just in the last 2 weeks. I mean, before that, it was a lot of working and reworking the language and, you know, memorizing pieces of it.
It was a good one to start with. I know it was our first time going.
Yeah.
So we had Ashley Van on the podcast probably about, I don't know, 8 months ago. And she had told us about it during that time. And so we attended this year and we really didn't know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And after yours, I'm not just saying this because you're here. We both looked at each other like, oh, this is going to be awesome.
This is legit.
And so you did a great job.
Thank you.
It was awesome to hear you then. So how much did you all end up getting? I mean, the monetary amount is great, but the exposure, I think, is really what.
Right.
Well, the exposure's been it's been huge. I mean, obviously I met you all and I'm here. I've had a couple of other phone calls of people that saw us on there. On the monetary side, I can't comment on that yet because we actually haven't been told. So I do know that they told us that day that everybody's going to get at least 25,000. And then they had a match. And if they had met the match, then everybody else was going to get an extra 10. So my understanding is that we're at a minimum of 35.
Yeah.
And then there's stuff that comes in based on people that actually could donate directly to that charity. And I have no idea what that number is, but we're supposed to find out. Actually, I think it's tomorrow.
Okay, nice. What are the next steps from here for community legal services? Where do you all want to be? How do you measure success? Is it based off of cases won, attorneys you have brought in? I mean,
measurement of success is a good question. We're actually in the process right now of reworking strategic plan. Historically, it's always been on like total number of cases, period. But the problem is the math with that gets funny. You know, I can do more cases, but only just give advice, or I could do less cases and take litigation. And I think it's more about the right types of cases. And so if you think about that idea of getting people early, the length of the case and the type of service we provide is not as important as making sure that the people we get, we can help.
Right.
And that we can help them, I think, with the least amount of resources. So too early to speculate on exactly what that looks like, but there's a lot of reworking there. I think part of the way we're going to measure that too is exposure. So our biggest problem has been, and I think we're changing that, and I don't know if we're there yet. At some point we need to measure this, but nobody knew who we are and what we did. And again, if you think about any other nonprofit doing work, if you bring in lawyers on top of that and you take, let's say, the 20% of clients that actually would need legal assistance, but those 20% get it, and all of a sudden you just guaranteed whatever resource they were lacking as opposed to just either provided it short term or gave them some sort of transitional piece. now you've actually made long-term change in the community. We're starting a partnership with WFTV called Law Talk.
Okay.
And myself and Chris Heath are going to be the hosts.
Okay.
And we're going to bring in a guest every month and basically do something like this.
Yeah, it's great.
We're going to televise it and then also have dedicated space on their website. And then
I
so it'll
love it.
probably be like 15 minutes or so
Yeah.
of a podcast. But then, we'll get maybe a 2-minute block on the air. And then, of course, on the website, you see something like 5, 7, 8 minutes.
And you get clips
love
off of it that you just
Exactly.
push, which is what we've been kind of doing, and hopefully we get to do for y'all too.
And so the goal is twofold, right? From a big picture perspective, we want people to not only be aware that there's resources out there and that lawyers are here to help,
Mm-hmm.
but really highlight the good that lawyers are doing. Because if you go back to the lawyer image, right, you're bound
Right.
at the bottom third.
Yeah.
Part of that is because where do people get their impressions of lawyers from, right? Billboards, TV commercials, and maybe the occasional like high profile case that's going on.
Which is it's like one segment of law. Though,
It is.
which is crazy.
Yeah.
But there are so many people out there that are doing good that it's a shame to not publicize it. And I think it's hurting the profession, frankly, because people start getting a bad impression of lawyers. I don't want to deal with lawyers. I don't want to talk to lawyers. I don't want anything to do with lawyers. And then it erodes the profession.
Right.
So, and then if you think about it from an even bigger picture, and this is kind of the point that I tried to make in Victory Cup, right? I go overseas 4 times
Mm-hmm.
to try to defend democracy. And then you come here and you look at our system of government and the checks and balances that you have, and you realize the judicial system is largely ineffective, not because of anything they're doing, but because the people that are meant to intermediate between the public and the judicial system aren't being effective.
Right.
In my first case I watched as a law student, you had a couple and they were on one side and the bank was on the other side, and the bank was garnishing their wages for debt. So the bank argued the maximum amount. Hey, this is what we're allowed to take under the law. This is how much we're going to take. And so the couple had what they believed was a really strong argument, which is, hey, we're separated now. And so we have to pay for 2 homes. We can't afford that much. But what the law says is, well, you have less dependents now, so you're going to pay more. And so you get to see a situation like that where you've got a couple they're in court. They're not arguing about the owing the debt. They're just arguing about how much they can actually pay to make ends meet. And the law isn't on their side, and they had no idea when they made that argument. And so from that perspective, is the system really working to protect everybody? And I'd say the answer is no. We got to find a way to get more people access to lawyers. And that really is kind of our vision, is legal access for all.
Yeah. It seems like you guys are well on your way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these episodes, right? That's the general big theme, right? And then each episode's going to focus on a particular area of law, maybe talk a little bit about, things people don't know or don't realize, because there's a whole lot of people out there that have kind of these misnomers of what they think the rules are, and it's not true.
And you guys have a great website that breaks down a lot of that too. I've been looking at it the last couple of days, and just all the different areas you talked about, whether it's housing, credit, bankruptcy, things like that. So I imagine that's kind of what the episodes will be.
Yep, part of it. And part of that is also to shed light on and maybe try to help in some way, shape, or form what they call the justice gap. So if you break the state's population into kind of quintiles, the bottom 20%, that bottom quintile, is who we can serve based on our funding, and it's up to 200% of the poverty level. But then there's this group right above that that's kind of like the 20% to the 40% called the justice gap.
Okay.
They can't afford a lawyer and they can't qualify for a service. So what happens is they face a legal issue. They lose because they don't know what they're doing. They don't have anybody to coach them, guide them, or give them advice. And then they become poor enough to qualify for my assistance. It doesn't make any sense.
Right. It's broken.
And so how do we address that group? And, we've had some conversations with state legislators about it, then working with the Florida bar to come up with ideas on it. Our little piece of this is really, we got the website that information is free to the public.
Right.
And so at a minimum, they can find a lot of good resources on what the real rules are. With this Law Talk, we'd like to kind of get more exposure for them on that. So
a lot of our friends and community and clients are attorneys. Is there any way they can get involved specifically? I know you hire professional that are full-time on staff, but anything pro bono in addition to just fundraising and other things like that?
Absolutely. We have probably about, I'd say 400 active volunteers every year, and we're always looking to make that grow. And the bar aspirationally requires that you do 2 cases a year. A lot of lawyers aren't necessarily doing that. They also give them an out and says you can write a check and write it off. But you go back to the purpose of the profession, and and I'd love to find somebody to do a study on this, but if you ask law students, why are you in law school? An overwhelming majority is going to say they want to help people.
Yeah.
If you talk to somebody who's practicing for 7-10 years, so they're not quite at the point where they've made like boatloads of money, but they're they're slugging it out still, right? They're going to tell you, run as far away as you can. Don't become a lawyer. This is miserable. And I think part of it's because they're so far disconnected for their purpose of why they did this in the first place, which is funny because the profession is not supposed to work that way. And so we really like to try to kind of give other lawyers an opportunity to really kind of feel good about what they're doing and big picture, right? If you look at the professional law, you compare it to the profession of the military, for example, they have all the same issues: alcoholism, drug addiction, mental health. It's all because in a profession, you're giving away a piece of yourself for the greater good.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a mechanism to replenish that, it's going to eat away at you. And so that's kind of the other thing we're trying to do. Is we'll take any volunteers you want.
Yeah.
And volunteers get worried, right? Because they're like, how much do I have to commit? If I take on a client, now I've got these responsibilities. I'll tell you, the first pro bono client I took before I entered the organization, I still think about this to this day. It's actually kind of sad, but it was a veteran. And I agreed to do his will. And he wanted to leave his home 50% to his daughter and 50% in a trust for a son if the son ever decided to go to college. Now, the son was like 42 years old, right?
Okay.
So no court's going to enforce a trust on a 42-year-old that has no disabilities or anything else. But then on top of that, the house was already titled in his daughter's name. So it wasn't his to give. And I went round and round with him, like, you can't do this. Here's the things we can do. Here's what we can try to do, but you can't do what you want to do. And he got angry. And so I remember calling the legal aid at the time and saying, hey, what do I do about this? And they're like, you just fire the client. And it never dawned on me that, like any other client that I could fire when they were being unreasonable, that I could fire a pro bono client, because I thought for whatever reason, magically, because they weren't paying me, I was obligated. And that's not the case. I mean, the good thing about doing the work with legal aids, and us in particular, we covered their malpractice insurance, but even more so, we have a whole staff, 70 lawyers, that if for some reason that attorney can't do the work anymore, they can hand it back. And that person's not kind of left, hanging on their own. So
that makes sense.
One of our best attorneys had an issue, had a family member die, and had like 5 cases with us, and said, I can't do this right now. It's going to take me 6 months to recover from all this. There was a lot of work to do. We took them all back. And I'll tell you, yesterday I sat with that attorney. We worked on a case together. So very easily to get out and get right back in. But people don't think about that. Lawyer population in Florida is roughly 100,000.
Okay.
There are about 500 legal aid lawyers. So if you go back to the quintiles we talked about, where you've got the bottom 20% of the people that we serve, then you've got the justice gap, and then you've got like that, from 40% to 100%, right? They can afford a lawyer. You've really got that bottom 40%. So 40% of the state of Florida, you're talking nearly 10 million people with 500 lawyers versus, the 12 million people in the top rate with 95,000 lawyers, or more than that, almost 99,000 lawyers, right?
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
from a need perspective, there's really a disproportional access. And then of course you got that justice gap group that really don't have anything at all. We talked earlier a little bit about the judicial branch, and I think that's the problem, is you got 40% of Floridians that don't have anything, or they've got to deal with 1 out of 500 lawyers.
Right.
I mean, that's where the volunteers really come into play, is that you get, so many more. Like with my 75 lawyers, I've got another 400 volunteers. Hopefully they're doing 2 cases a year. That's another 800 cases that I can do on top of the staff that I have. But that's why the volunteers are so important.
One of the things that you've kind of already touched on is just how big leadership is to you. And we've touched on that a lot. How do you think, we kind of going back to the start, you said you probably wouldn't have identified it that way when you were growing up and a child. Was there something that you can point to, though, that when you were growing up that just made you like put such a high importance on leadership and that being part of your life? I
naturally gravitated towards those types of positions. I didn't really kind of zoom out and say like, oh, this is because you got interested in leadership. Right. But I did that. I'm an Eagle Scout. So
same. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, I went through all that process. People that are now coming full circle and helping me out here in this organization were people that helped me out way back then. Tico Perez, if you're familiar with Tico Perez, great example. Like he actually facilitated something for me to get a donation, and now he's on our advisory council. And I hadn't talked to him since then. So it's been real big. But that's kind of how I got through it. And then the Army kind of flipped the switch and it said, oh wait, this makes sense. And so I've gotten a master's degree in leadership, and that kind of helped broaden that understanding. And then of course, now that I'm kind of cognizant of what I'm doing, leading organizations is really where I enjoy my time.
Well, it's funny you brought up your master's because I feel like we're always in school for something, but
Yeah.
it seems like you're a lifelong learner as well.
My wife said this is the last one.
Yeah. So how many degrees is it at this point?
Yeah. So undergraduate political science and theology.
Okay.
I have a master's degree in human development and leadership, a law degree, an MBA, and I'm currently working on a master's in strategy from the Army War College that, knock on wood, I'll be done in June.
There you
July, yeah, and then we're done.
Last one,
My wife said no more school.
Yeah, we'll see.
I hadn't planned on the last one, but they picked me to go, and if they pick you to go,
cool.
you go. It's quite an honor. So
going forward, what's kind of like, what can we expect from CLS in the future? I know we talked about marketing, that big push,
yeah,
everything else. What's kind of, you look 10 years out, what are we going to see?
10 years out. That's a hard question. I'm really only looking at like a year out, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's got enough on your plate.
The theme for the year is strategic success. And so we are starting to, I guess, for lack of a better word, blow up. But I want to make sure we do it sustainably. And I want to make sure we do it in a way that doesn't, at any way, shape, or form, harm our ability to serve clients or reduce that. The ideal, right, is that we're able to help the entire need. The funny thing is I think most nonprofits will look at need and say, well, you're never going to solve it all, so we'll just do as much as we can. I think it's quantifiable. Like we can calculate the amount of money it would take to do that. We can calculate the amount of volunteers it would take to do that. So you keep working towards that number. That's great.
We appreciate you being here. We appreciate your service to the country and also your service to our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.